NBC's David Noriega joins us live in Los Angeles. Also with us, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley and Jason Hauser, former chief of staff for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. David, how have these demonstrations now evolved in the past 24 hours? Bring us up to speed.
Well, Anna, the number of protesters has remained in the hundreds over the last couple of days. That is significantly lower than the number when the protests started on Friday and into the weekend. And I would say the sort of atmosphere or tenor of the protest has also evolved away from the kinds of, violence and direct confrontations with the police that we saw in the beginning of the mobilizations. Yesterday, for example, I noticed immediately as soon as people started gathering in the afternoon and into the evening that there was a pretty sort of joyous, celebratory atmosphere to these gatherings. Across the street at the federal building behind me, there were groups of people dancing, playing music. When federal agents and troops would need to bring in police vehicles into the parking lot, which in the past have been kind of flashpoints of confrontation, there were no issues. People voluntarily moved out of the way. However, that has not changed the scale and intensity of the response to these mobilizations by local and state law enforcement, which is still deploying massive numbers of officers, some on horseback, and not allowing these groups of people to congregate for very long at all, especially not on public roadways. But again, I want to stress, I've seen no violence, no property destruction, no vandalism from protesters in the last couple of days. The atmosphere of the protests is definitely shifting, but local law enforcement is not in any way lessening or backing away on its crackdown. Anna.
Julia, social media posts from the Department of Homeland Security appear to show that officials are using unarmed Predator drones to surveil these demonstrations in Los Angeles. What are we learning?
That's right. We heard reports of this, and then DHS confirmed it on their own social media by showing these images, clearly being able to scan the crowd. DHS has had these drones for a while. Most of the time, they're used at the border. They can stop narcotics. It's a great way for them to see as mass amounts of people might have come, say, through a caravan. If there are places along the border where people are coming through, they might be able to come in there. We also heard from Jacob Soboroff, who was just outside of L.A. yesterday, that he saw a CBP Black Hawk in that area. That is all part of CBP's Air and Marine mission. That's usually used to rescue people who have basically succumbed to the elements as they try to cross the border. So they're using tools that are in DHS and CBP's disposal. They've been used for surveillance before. They've been used for rescue missions before, but they're using it in a completely different way now that they're in the interior of the United States surveilling protests. So this is something DHS is not shying away from. They're showing the sophistication of the surveillance equipment, but of course, that does fan the flames and can anger some protesters when they're worried about their civil liberties, Anna.
And Jason, we've also reported that Marines deployed to Los Angeles could be used to provide security and transportation for ICE personnel as they continue to make arrests of immigrants. I just wonder, have National Guard or active duty troops ever accompanied ICE operations before, to your knowledge?
No, they haven't. This is unprecedented, and sort of the administration has made it clear that they want to walk the military up to the line of sort of going from, the National Guard have been focused on the rioters and the protesters. But when they finally jump that line and you begin to see National Guard and Marines carrying out domestic immigration enforcement, that's a very scary line, both for law enforcement and also those migrants that were here legally, were here, had status, and are now being targeted for arrest. And Marines are trained and are a very lethal tool in national security. We need our Marines, and they keep us safe every day from global threats. But to having Marines or National Guard sort of begin doing, knocks and bangs on doors, going in to get families, children, vulnerable populations, it's not within their mission set or their training. And just to build on what Julia said, is again, like with the drones and the Black Hawks, those drones and Black Hawks aren't on station now at the border defending us from human smuggling and human trafficking and drug smuggling. So the border we don't have those resources there. Additionally, we do not have our ERO officers within ICE or federal law enforcement or National Guard or Marines focused on national security and public safety threats. That's how far we have come as the administration continues to seek arrest quotas of non-criminal migrants that were vetted and screened, had status, and they're turning our national security apparatus away from the public safety threats and our global threats into domestic immigration enforcement.
Julia, in your reporting over the concerns about rules of engagement for these military members, you reference a moment during the 1992 riots after the police beating of Rodney King. Marines were called in then, and there was this incident where they apparently accompanied law enforcement to a domestic disturbance. What happened?
From a book by the person who was the head of the National Guard that was called into Los Angeles in 1992 during the Rodney King riots. And it really lays out a playbook for what could happen here with the Marines' involvement in National Guard involvement in L.A., where he talks about a time where they were going in and the National Guard said, I need cover. That can mean something really different depending on your training. And for this, the person who gave the message, they meant have your guns pointed. They were coming into a domestic disturbance in the aftermath or in the wake of these riots, and have your guns pointed in case there's fire, in case you need to defend me. But the Marine misinterpreted that and opened fire, and people died as a result. And so this all comes down to how clear the rules of engagement need to be. And as my colleague Courtney Kube has reported, she has heard that the Marines have rules of engagement on laminated cards in their pockets, very different from getting weeks-long training on how they should be interacting. We understand their purpose is to provide security and logistics around ICE operations, not to be going down and making the arrest themselves. But of course, if you're providing backup like they did in 1992, things can go awry if you don't have a very clear line on what simple commands like, please cover me, mean.
Yeah, that's a real striking example of what could go wrong. David, there are drones now. We have Marines. There's lots of national attention on this issue. What kind of ripple effect is all this having on the immigrant community there in Los Angeles, especially for those who are undocumented and living in the shadows?
Well, undocumented people themselves are terrified. They're afraid to leave their homes. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to take their kids to school, to go to their kids' graduations. Undocumented people's loved ones are either terrified or feeling very emboldened to come out, for example, onto the streets and protest. And it's not just about the fact that federal agents are coming and arresting people in L.A. It's about the way that they're doing it. These operations appear. Well, the way that they're being carried out is really shocking communities. It's shocking people. You have tactical units showing up with masks, with long guns in unmarked vehicles, moving very aggressively, going to places where people work in the open air so that they don't have to show warrants, like places like Home Depot parking lots and car washes and agricultural fields. I spoke to an organizer who runs a worker center for car wash workers. Car washes are a good example of the kinds of businesses that federal agents have been targeting, particularly over the weekend. And she told me that, again, that the way the tactics these agents are using is a big part of what is striking fear in these communities. Take a listen to a part of what she told me.
They're not identifying themselves. The cars are not identified. They're not responding to questions of the workers, of the community, of the customers who are saying, who are you and where are you taking them? What are you doing here? I'm at a loss for words to understand, like, how do we tell somebody we don't know where their loved ones are when there's supposed to be procedures in place and systems in place to allow you to know that?
That last point that you heard her make there, Anna, is an important one that I fear sometimes is getting lost in the kind of chaos here, is the fact that of the hundreds of people who have been detained, at least here in Southern California over the last week or so, very, very few of them, a very small percentage of them, have actually been able to get in contact with their family members or their lawyers. That is extremely difficult for families who can't locate their loved ones. They don't know where they are. Flor, for example, that organizer you just heard from, told me that of the 26 people who were arrested in car washes over the weekend, they've only been able to locate 4 of them, 2 of whom were already deported to Mexico just a matter of days after they were deported. So that is part of what is really contributing to this atmosphere, not only of fear, but also of anger that is fueling people to come out onto the streets. Anna.
And Jason, yesterday I spoke to the head of the Immigrant Defenders Law Center, and I want to play some of what she told me about what she called horrific conditions that people are facing after they've been detained by ICE. Let's watch.
We received reports of a family, 2 parents, young parents with a 3-year-old child who were held in an office building for over 2 days and only given Lay's potato chips and milk and animal crackers for their young child. We heard from people yesterday that for days one man who was diabetic wasn't given his medication. We heard about another person who went days without their medication, sleeping on the floors of rooms that are usually the day centers for those detention centers.
Jason, your thoughts on that? What questions does this raise?
One, as a law enforcement professional, and quite frankly as a human being, it distresses me when you place quotas on ICE officers to go out and arrest non-criminal vetted migrants and bring them into custody, where you have, you've already maxed out detention space, and there's no foreseeable path for removal even, and you're bringing people that were on alternative to detention and bringing them into custody, and you're maxing out these facilities. There's less and less ICE officers to oversee those facilities and care for those individuals. ICE officers know that they are in the enforcement of the INA, the Immigration and Naturalization Act, but they're also in the human business. They're in human custody business, in the care of human beings. And we have to remember that these individuals, the vast majority, the 98 to 99%, came here seeking a better life. And this quota is being driven by the White House of arrests is going to continue to put pressure on these facilities, these detention cells and facilities, and people are going to get hurt. And it's also going to put the ICE officers in an extremely dangerous situation.